scary story about the mother. In Russia, there was a husband and wife who lived happily together. The couple was deeply in love. After they got married, the mother became pregnant and gave birth to a healthy baby boy. But during the childbirth, something went terribly wrong and the mother died. The husband was devastated. He didn't know how to take care of the baby on his own, so he hired an old woman to look after it. But then things began to get very strange. During the day, the baby cried all day and refused to eat any food. Nothing the old woman did for the child calmed it down. But during the night, the baby would get quiet and fall asleep, silently and peacefully. The baby's behavior was very weird, so the old woman stayed up all night to watch the baby and get to the bottom of it. Just after midnight, the old woman heard footsteps going into the baby's room. The old woman then peeked through the doorway, and what she saw filled her with fear. The dead mother was standing there in the darkness, kneeling beside the cradle, breastfeeding the baby. The old woman screamed, and the husband came rushing into the room. The mother disappeared when the father got there, and when the husband checked on the baby, it laid there dead. This is the creepy story about the cave. A young man had been sent to inspect a forest in a remote mountain region. He was staying at an inn that was owned by a husband and wife. The wife was a beautiful girl with nice eyes and hair, and the husband was a fat man who never spoke. As the weeks went by, a strange mutual attraction grew between the young man and the husband's wife. The husband spent the nights drinking himself to sleep, leaving the young man and the wife alone. One day, the husband was called to visit his sick mother. Finding himself alone with the husband's wife again, the young man suggested they go for a walk. The wife agreed happily. When they were walking, they came upon a cave. They both looked at each other and went inside the cave. They embraced each other and started to kiss. When suddenly it got pitch dark in the cave, and somebody blocked the entrance with something massive. They were trapped inside. Outside, they heard footsteps and the evil laughter of the husband. The husband then yelled, "Now you guys could be together forever, ever, and ever." He then walked away from the cave, leaving them to die. The young man and the husband's wife was never seen again. This is the scary story about the Red Star. There was a married couple who moved into a new house in England. One day, the man was going to the bathroom, but when he opened the door, he saw a big red star drawn on the wall. It looked like a satanic symbol. He tried to show his wife, but she said she didn't see anything. The man thought to himself he must be seeing things. A couple days later, he saw red stars drawn all over the living room walls. He tried to show his wife, but again she said she couldn't see anything. Every time he went into the living room or the bathroom, there were red stars. He tried to wash them off, but it never worked. Then late one night, he remembered that he left something important in his closet, so he got up and opened his closet door, and when he did, he saw a person with a mask and a hoodie on, standing there holding a knife and a permanent red marker. He was never seen again. 3 years later, a new family came to live there. They saw the living room and bathroom covered in red pentagrams. They also smelled something terrible coming from the attic. When they went up to the attic to look, they screamed in horror. There on the ground was the missing man's rotten corpse. He was covered with red pentagrams. Most scariest people to ever live, Part 2. This is Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was a cunning, charming psychopath who kidnapped, raped, and murdered 30 women in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. He would typically approach his victims in public places, faking an injury or a disability. Then he would overpower and assault his victim and take them to a secluded location. Ted Bundy was patient and he normally killed his victims slowly to prolong his own sadistic pleasure. Ted Bundy also had sexual relations with his victims' dead corpses. He needed to murder people to satisfy his own terrible desires. He also took Polaroid pictures of his victims as a souvenir or trophy so he could remember it forever. After he got arrested in Colorado in 1975, he made 2 dramatic jail escapes and committed 3 more murders before his ultimate recapture in Florida in 1978. He was then put to death in the electric chair. Ted Bundy is perhaps the most infamous and oddly popular serial killer of all time. Millions of people are still fascinated by him 30 years after his execution. This is the scary story about the homeowner. One day, a young man was doing some yard work for a little extra money when he noticed a homeowner watching him from the window. Now, this wasn't weird at all, but what was weird though was how every time the young man looked up at the homeowner just disappeared. The young man started to get annoyed, so he decided to knock on the front door and ask the homeowner, "Why you keep looking at me?" He knocked, but no one answered. He kept knocking and knocking, but nobody answered. There was a person walking by and she said, "Hey kid, what are you doing?" The young man said, "I'm doing this person's yard work and they keep looking at me through the window." "That's impossible," said the woman. "The lady who lived there died years ago and nobody moved in ever since." The young man then got a chill down his spine. As the woman who was walking walked away, he turned around and saw the creepy woman in the window waving at him. This is the creepy story about the wedding album. There was a young couple who just got married. The wedding was wonderful, and they took many photos so they can remember the special occasion. For their honeymoon, they went to France, and they stayed in a very dark old mansion. The woman couldn't sleep that night, so she went downstairs to the library to clear her head. She then picked out a random book and opened it. Inside were pictures of her at her wedding. She was very confused and scared at first, but then thought it was a surprise from her husband. When she reached the end of the album, there was more pictures of her, but they were not pictures of the wedding. The first picture was the woman standing in the library. The second was a picture of her again, but this time the library door was open. She began to feel uneasy. On the third picture, the door was wide open, and a faceless man was standing behind the woman. The woman turned around, but the door was closed. The last picture showed the faceless man standing behind the woman with the knife raised in his hand. The next morning, the husband woke up and he could not find his wife until he went in the library. Lying behind the door, he found his wife lying in a pool of blood with a knife sticking out of her back. This is the scary story about the woman in the Gap. A college student decided to visit one of his friends. He was excited because he didn't see his friend in a while. When he got to his friend's house, he found his friend hiding in his room beneath his covers. They talked for a very long time, and the student found his friend's behavior very strange. After a while, he stood up to leave, and his friend suddenly said, "You can't go." His face was urgent and he was dead serious. The student said, "Why not?" And his friend said in a fearful voice, "She won't let you leave." The student looked around the room confused and said, "Who's she? There's nobody else in the room." His friend then said, "If you leave, she will follow you and kill you." The student stared at his friend confused. He then saw his friend look at the closet in the corner of the room. He followed his eyes and looked at the closet, and a chill ran down his spine. There in the shadow of the door slightly open, he saw a creepy young girl staring back at him with a very big knife in her hands. This is the scary story about the barber. One day a man named Jack was going to get a haircut. When he got to the barber shop, he realized he was the only customer when it's usually packed. And there was only one barber in there who he never seen before. Jack didn't think much of this, so he just sat down in the seat. The barber started cutting his hair and talking to him. Then he pulled out the spray bottle to get his hair wet, but instead the barber sprayed it all on Jack's face. Jack got pretty upset, but he brushed it off. Then he began to get very tired, and suddenly he passed out. He then woke up in some empty room tied to an operating table. He was shaking with fear. Suddenly the door opened and the barber came in. He then said, "You're not my first victim. I do this to every single one of my customers. Don't be scared, be happy. You're about to meet your maker." He then pulled out a knife and stabbed it into Jack's stomach. The last thing Jack ever saw was the barber cutting off his legs and laughing hysterically.